Hello and welcome to Tag Talk. At Tag Talk, we usually take the opportunity to tell you a little bit about what's in the Adjutant General Directorate here at Human Resources Command. But today, we're going to change it up just a little bit. Fun fact, the Physical Disability Agency is underneath the Adjutant General Directorate for responsibility. But really, it works directly with HQDA, Headquarters Department of the Army, and the Department of Defense. And it comes down to medical readiness and readiness for our soldiers and our teams. So I'm honored today to have with me the Ops Division Chief from the Physical Disability Agency, Mr. Lem Chance.
Thank you, ma'am.
Yeah, it's nice for you to travel all the way to Kentucky to be on my show.
Absolutely.
And to leave warm Texas.
Yes, ma'am, for sure.
So could you tell us a little bit about you?
Yes, ma'am, I can. First of all, greetings from the U.S. Army Physical Disability Agency in San Antonio, Texas, actually joint base San Antonio, Texas. The Physical Disability Agency was established on 1 July of 1967. One of the featured aspects about the Physical Disability Agency is that we are responsible for when a soldier's career is interrupted due to illness or injury, and they cannot be retained in their respective rank, grade, or MOS. It is our job to ensure that the fitness of those service members is adjudicated based off of statutory requirements as well as DoD policy and Army policy. Myself, I'm the Chief of the Disability Evaluation System Operations Division, and one of the things, ma'am, that I pride myself on about the organization I love so much is because I too was one of those injured soldiers who came through this process. And with respect to IDES, as your question was the lead-in, is that the Integrated Disability Evaluation System is a pre-delivery discharge program that is a joint effort between both the DoD and the VA. It allows the service members the opportunity that while they're being determined fit or unfit and being medically evaluated, it also provides the opportunity for the Department of Veterans Affairs to establish disability ratings, which will serve as compensation once they transition and separate from service.
Awesome. And as you said, as a former soldier and a leader in our Army, I know you take great pride in having the ability to continue to take care of soldiers, but also have an immediate impact on the readiness of our Army. Talked to a couple people out in the field, and they're a little bit confused on Physical Disability Agency and the phase that we can affect and the number of stages it takes to get through the process. Can you talk a little bit about the stages?
Sure. The IDES process is a 4-phase process, which deals with the time prior to the service member being referred into the process, dealing with their medical treatment. Once they have completed all of their medical treatment and the physician determines that they've reached what is called their medical retention decision point, meaning that regardless of whatever treatment, the outcome is going to remain relatively the same and that the likelihood of them returning to service is improbable. Once they are referred into the process, they enter phase 1, which is the actual MEB phase of the process, which is the Medical Evaluation Board. Of course, that process is controlled by the Army Office of the Surgeon General and U.S. Army Medical Command. And then once that medical evaluation is complete, they will determine whether or not the service member is required to then be referred to the Physical Evaluation Board, which is what is controlled by you and, of course, the team with the Physical Disability Agency in Texas. That is where the actual fitness determination is made for that service member. And if they are determined unfit, what will then happen is there'll be a final disposition that is rendered to the service member that will result in a separation. It may be a separation with a severance pay or a disability retirement. And if the condition is not in the line of duty, it may be a separate without benefits. That then enters the 3rd phase of the process, if they're unfit, which will be known as transition. And in the transition phase, and I'll go back to the previous 2 phases, there are goals associated with each of the 4. And transition phase is 26 days, which is from the time we approve those findings on behalf of the Secretary of the Army until the date the service member separates. That's a 26-day goal. But again, going back to the previous 2 phases, which were the MEB and the PEB, the MEB phase goal is actually 72 days, and then, 72 days, and then the PEB phase goal is actually 82. So that involves everything from the time ratings and everything are determined by the VA up until that point of separation. And within 30 days after the service member does separate from service, they should be in receipt of not only their DoD compensation, but as well as VA benefits.
So you said four phases.
Yes, ma'am.
The MEB, the MEB, the PEB, the PEB, and just because you go into an MEB doesn't mean that you're going to stay within the process. You could be found fit and not have to go in front of the physical evaluation board.
Correct.
After the physical evaluation board, you go into the transition. So those are the three. And what's our last one?
The last one is actually VA benefits.
Yeah.
And that is a phase that's not necessarily measured by the DoD, although we do keep record on what the timeliness average is. But that occurs once the service member has separated. If you're active duty, for example, and you receive a DD Form 214, there is a key date that's needed for the VA to issue that, quote, final benefits eligibility letter. So once they separate and there is a DD Form 214 that is published, and the Defense Manpower Data Center has notified the VA of that separation, the VA then can issue those benefits.
Wow. So usually if you missed something, you know, MEB, PEB, transition phase, now we have your attention. We're talking about money,
Yes,
and we're
ma'am.
talking about benefits, and it's about the soldier and the family he or she may be supporting. So how long does it take to get benefits?
Good question, ma'am, and that's a question that we often receive during the course of the service member's process while they're in the IDES. The total time of the DoD measured goal for completion of the process is 180 days. Right now, the Army's averaging about 234, and this will segue into some other discussion points as we talk here. But once that process is complete, meaning that we've rendered the final disposition and the service member now has a separation date, the time to receive those benefits would be 30 days after their IDES process is complete. So when we look at the measurement of IDES from the DoD perspective, it's based off of when the service member was referred to the process up until they separate from service, that date of separation, 180 days. The benefits phase is not calculated into the DoD measurement currently.
Interesting. You mentioned DoD goal is 180 days. But you said the Army is averaging, you know, a little over 230 days. Why does it take so long?
Good question again, too, ma'am, which is another important question that we receive all the time, and that is, with this process, there are some barriers that occur within each of the phases of the process. Just like with other organizations within the Army, we're faced with some staffing challenges at the MEB. Right now, within the PEB, we're pretty good in terms of our staffing. But you have delays such as attorneys who represent the soldiers while they're going through the process, because in accordance with statute, every service member who is going through this process is entitled to be represented by counsel. And if they demand a formal hearing, which is part of their due process, they're entitled to that. And the only ones that can do that are the attorneys. That, coupled with some of the delays that occur with COVID and the VA restricting some of the access to facilities to do some of the medical exams, that's impacted timeliness tremendously over the last 2 years. We're starting to see that improvement now compared to last year. We actually saw an improvement of about 6 to 10% in terms of our timeliness improving. At one point, DoD estimated a timeliness average of about 300, and actually Army has kind of fell below that. So we're touting ourselves on just being able to be flexible and being, you know, versatile, you know, given the constraints that we just mentioned.
Yeah, definitely. But a goal's out there, right?
Yes,
And
ma'am.
so being in the Army and being on this team that likes to win, because winning matters,
Absolutely.
we want to hit that DoD goal again if and when we can. But one of the ways we can probably get better at hitting that goal and the timeliness within each one of those stages is help from the soldier and help from leaders. So if you were talking to a commander, a first sergeant, command sergeant major, what are some of the things you recommend they do in order to get a positive result out of this process?
Excellent question, ma'am. And I will tell you that probably number one is that we need commanders and first line leaders to be dialed into the process from the very beginning. When their service member is wounded, ill, or injured, and there's the likelihood that they're going to be referred to this process, and there's a likelihood that they won't return, the commanders need to be there with them from day one, from the referral up until the date they separate and transition. Get to know who the physical evaluation board liaison officers are at the different medical treatment facilities at the installations. That PEBLO, as the term is often used, that acronym, they are the vital link from that service member being initially referred into the process up until their point of separation. What we also encourage commanders to do is to better educate themselves on what this process is made of, where they come into play as far as making the difference to help improve timeliness. We know service members will transition because right now, when it comes to statistics of the Army, those that are referred to this process, 97% of the soldiers do not return to the force. So we need commanders to really be read in and be educated on this process.
Yeah, that's a great, great statistic. So if you're entering into the PEB, you know that the likelihood that you will be transitioning within the next 6 months or less is very likely, 97%. And so there are certain things that leaders need to do to be informed about the Physical Disability Agency and all of the different benefits to help the soldier, but also prepping the soldier for a transition out of the Army. So when soldiers contact you about the process, if they are having a challenge with leadership, whether it's in leave, balance, or their transition timeline, what recommendations do you make to those soldiers?
One of the main recommendations that we do make to soldiers that when they're in that situation and they've been notified of their unfit determination by the PEB, that is the time that they need to begin engaging their leadership to begin that transition process. When it comes to leave, soldiers can take leave throughout the process. It just has to be coordinated with their chain of command, and of course their PEBLO should be read into that process, because there are times when leave is not appropriate because they're undergoing medical evaluation or VA appointments. So we just ask that the prudent thing to do for the services when they're going through this is that as soon as they're notified of their referral and their unfit determination by the PEB, that they begin engaging their leadership at that point so they can begin that transition.
Right. I know a number of soldiers have a large leave balance, especially over the past 2 years, COVID implications and being able to go anywhere on leave. And so I hear a lot, well, I wasn't able to go anywhere, and so I had this large leave balance. So they can take leave during the process, as long as you don't miss an appointment.
Yes,
so why do commanders in the field say you're not allowed to take leave during this process?
Oftentimes we hear commanders say that they want access to their soldier day in and day out. They don't want them on leave. They want to know their whereabouts while they're navigating this process. But again, it comes back to the fundamental responsibility of accountability on the part of the leader. That if they're going through this, because remember, this is a life-changing event for a service member. There's the likelihood, again, as I said before, that they won't come back to the Army. That, again, 97% of our force that come through this process don't return. So it is appropriate at this point for the leaders to ensure that because of this, that they can begin their transition just like any other voluntary or involuntary separation process. It's no different.
Yeah, definitely. And really, if commanders out there ask me, well, why should I let them take leave? And it really comes down to readiness.
Yes, ma'am.
And so we're talking about, the care for soldiers and those that raised their right hand and volunteered. And we want to see them through until their final transition day. But at the end of the day, we need a ready Army. And part of that readiness is having ready forces. And you can't get a replacement potentially until you have someone depart. So it's important for commanders to help their soldier through the process in the most expedient method, but it also gets them a new ready soldier. Anything else we should talk about if we had a group of S1s in the room? What would you say to those HR professionals about the process?
The one takeaway or follow-up discussion that I would have with those folks in the HR community, particularly those G1s and S1s, are that there are tools and resources available to them to maintain track and accountability of their service members while they're going through the process. USA PDA makes ourselves disposable to them because oftentimes we do receive several requests from major commands out there in the field asking about IDES statistics, statuses. Of note, I think the big success story, ma'am, for us is that with U.S. Army Forces Command, it's a big tool that we use with them working on daily readiness updates, but more importantly, they like to know kind of where their soldiers are in the process. And we coordinate with those commands sometimes when there are situations or extenuating circumstances that requires a service member to accelerate their process, but ensuring due process that they complete. So the PDA is here to serve and support those units out there. I would encourage them to be dialed into a lot of the multidisciplinary briefings that occur at the MTFs for these soldiers when they go through. That will really help paint the good sight picture for those S1s to know exactly what their soldiers are about to go through. Because in the end, when you talk about the medically non-deployable population for the Army, we're talking 30% of that population are soldiers who are in the IDES process.
Wow. Yeah, 30%. And so really you're talking almost 12,000
Yes, ma'am.
that are going through the IDES process one of those 4 stages
Correct.
at any given time. And so within that average, about how much is active component and how much is our reserve component?
Very good question, ma'am. The active component population is right about 74 to 75% of our total IDES population. So statistically, over the last several years, when you're talking about the Guard and the Reserve, they typically account for about 25 to 26% of the population for the service members. And that includes those that are on active duty, as well as those who may not be on active duty in a drilling status that get referred to this process.
Yeah, so I just want to make sure, for our audience that this isn't just about the active component, it's all compos. So we need all commanders, all S1s involved to help, our first sergeants, our command sergeants major. And so we talk about, accountability in the process and making sure that we're taking care of them. Any last comment you had about the overall process or where we could use some improvement?
Yeah, 2 comments, ma'am. I think one is important that this process has evolved over time. So a little history on it. IDES started in 2007 by a program that was called what we call the DES pilot, or Disability Evaluation System pilot. And that was where DOD and VA had to come together because there was a statutory mandate that stated that both the service secretary, in other words DOD in this case, and the Secretary of VA come together with a streamlined process for disability evaluation. But IDES was actually spawned through DOD policy. So when we looked at the process from the very beginning, it started out for an average service member before there was IDES, you spent about 300 days going through a DOD process. Then once you separated, it took you 200 days to go through the VA. So you're looking 500 days, give or take. We've taken that down since 2007, down to 180 days. So you're talking about a 40%, almost 50% reduction in the process. The intent behind the process was noble in that we wanted to ensure that when service members are going through this for disability evaluation, that they wouldn't have to go through 2 separate organizations that may have inconsistencies on how they determine a disability rating. So considering where we've come and the over 200,000 soldiers that have come through the DOD process, this process is designed to work, and it does work, because on average right now, when VA receives that information from the services, in this case Army, they're getting benefits out to the service member in 21 days.
Wow.
So it's come a long way.
Yeah, so stay in the process, follow the stages,
Yes, ma'am.
don't miss your appointments, have leader involvement, maintain accountability of your soldier throughout the process. So if I want to go online and read more about IDES or the Physical Disability Agency, where are some great places to go?
A couple of recommendations would be for those that are recovering service members, the Army Recovery Care Program website. This is arcp.army.mil. Has a lot of good information there regarding the IDES process. You can also visit the DOD website, the DOD Warrior Care Policy Office. In this case now it's actually the Recovery Care Program Office, kind of similar concept with the Army. But also on the Adjutant General website, under the different divisions within the tag. The Physical Disability Agency has a section earmarked there for a lot of references, information about the process, to include our standards of service. And then lastly, Google, which is very universal for everybody. Soldiers go out there all the time inquiring about the Physical Disability Evaluation Agency, but IDES in general. So a lot of good resources out there. The other piece to that I would say is that at all of the transition centers, most of the transition centers there have folks who are VA representatives that work there in their offices, that are veteran service organizations who are familiar with IDES as well, because sometimes they represent soldiers if they're going to a formal hearing while they're in the IDES.
Great information. So you heard it here from Mr. Lem Chance, our Ops Division Chief from the Physical Disability Agency. Make sure you're informed. Stay in the know by checking out the different websites. If you can't remember and you're not watching the flashing sign that's hopefully going above our heads right now, Google Physical Disability Agency or Google IDES for Army. And if you're out on an installation, on a post, I would recommend, whether you're a commander or an HR professional or a soldier in the process, go to your installation offices for transition assistance and ask about your VA rep, and go to your medical treatment facility and ask about the reps that are helping with our transitioning soldiers. We're here to take care of you, and I Thank you very much for taking time out to hear a little bit about the Physical Disability Agency and the IDES process, because readiness starts here. Thank you so much. Have a great rest of your day.